welcome to the course Introduction to Advanced Cognitive Processes. I am Ark Verma from IIT Kanpur. We are already in the 7th week of this course and we have already talked about a variety of things. This course was termed Higher Cognitive Processes because we wanted to talk about things other than perception, attention, memory, which anyways lay the foundation of the cognitive activity that we engage in. So, we have in this course talked about knowledge, categorization, concepts, we have talked about language to a large extent, we have talked about reasoning, decision making, problem solving. So, we have done quite a bit about the higher so-called higher cognitive processes by now, and in this week I will try and talk about one of the very important aspects of cognition, which is also recognized as a very important aspect which kind of affects the operation of so many of these higher cognitive processes, if you might call them so. So, this week I will talk about cognition and emotion. We will have 5 lectures talking about various aspects of the interaction between cognition, which is the general things like attention, thinking, problem solving, those kind of things, memory, and also how emotion or say for example mood states interact with them and what are their mutual effects on each other. So, let us begin this week, and I will try and talk to you about, I will try to draw your attention to the kind of work we have discussed till now. So, if you have paid attention, if you have been following the lectures, you would have noticed that most of this research that we are talking about, most of this research on which a lot of cognitive psychology theory is based, has basically been conducted in our laboratories. It has followed the experimental technique, which suppose in which the attempt is to control all possible sources of variation other than the independent variable, other than the major variable that you are interested in manipulating. Now, what that does to this entire setting is that we kind of sometimes end up creating a scenario which is not really like how this activity or how this cognitive process would occur in the real life settings. In the real life settings there are not so many controls. In the real life settings you do not cordon off so many of the other variables that might play a part. So, this is one of the things that has been felt throughout, and that is one of the things, because a lot of cognitive psychology research, or actually most of cognitive psychology research has been done in psychology laboratories. Laboratories are small rooms where, say for example, a computer system is kept there, you can do your behavioral tasks there, and then you can vary the kind of method you will use to look at the data. Say for example, you can go for eye tracking, EEG or fMRI or wherever. Now, this basically has led to a degree of skepticism in people within the discipline as well and outside the discipline as well, who basically question about the ecological validity of the kind of findings that we are coming up with. And just for people who let us say, just as a revision, talk a little bit about ecological validity as well. Now, by ecological validity, what I am actually talking about is the fact that whatever results you have got, and whichever process you follow to collect that data, whichever process you follow to really come up with those kind of findings, the experimental designs, the participants, etc., how easy it is or how probable, how possible it is to be able to generalize from your experiment to the real life settings. How say for example, how easy or difficult it is, say for example, if I am conducting an experiment here in IIT Kanpur on a bunch of 20-30 undergraduate students, how from that data I will be able to tell you about all people that are there in Kanpur, or maybe all people that are there in India, or basically the kind of variables we talk about in cognitive psychology. The assumption is that even if I am doing this experiment here in Kanpur with this bunch of students that I have sampled, because of these because I am talking about these cognitive variables, technically I should be able to talk about the whole of humanity using just that kind of sample. This is one of the problems. This is basically termed as ecological validity, the generalizability of your data. How well your data will kind of extrapolate to larger groups. So, the factors that I have been mentioning have been underlined, have been thought to be in some ways impediments in this gross generalizability of the experiments. Now, obviously, ecological validity and there is obviously a cost to pay here if you want to really get into the really ecologically valid things, collecting data in less controlled situations, collecting data on a large number of people. Those things do have their own logistic problems, and those things do have their own problems in terms of methodology as well. If you don't control so many variables, you are not going to be sure of what kind of effects you are getting. So, obviously, there is a trade-off, and interestingly, there is an acknowledgement of the fact, and there is concerned effort in the field of cognitive psychology nowadays, that a lot of people are trying to take their experiments as they are on larger groups. A lot of people are trying to say, for example, if your task is a very simple, let us say a lexical decision task, where you have to just look at a word and say whether it is a word, meaningful word or not a word. I've seen, and I've been coming across studies where they are kind of pushing these tasks to things like your mobile phones, your PDAs and stuff like that, and a lot of people are doing. I came across a study some time back where they collected data on 300,000 participants. So, there is that kind of effort. I will come back to this discussion on cognition and emotion. One of the important aspects of the kind of experiments that are done in cognitive psychology, and one of the working assumptions is that all of these people who are coming to our labs, all of these people who are participating in our experiments and giving us data, are all in a sort of a neutral state of mind. So, you assume, and sometimes you take that effort to relax a person, to make them make them relax, make them sit well, ask for a glass of water and stuff like that, make them relax, so they are in a neutral state of mood. They are in a good place to be able to do that experiment, sit on that computer for whatever amount of time. Now, this aspect that we sometimes try and ensure, and this aspect that you assume that your participants are in such a state of mind before they are doing these experiments, kind of create a contrast between how they would do these decisions in real lives. Because in the real life, you come across, you take so many of these decisions, you solve so many of these problems in states of mind which are not neutral. I mean, sometimes you are very excited about making particular kinds of decisions, sometimes you might be really low, you have not had a great day and you are still making a particular decision. So, if cognitive psychology has to talk about all of these things, cognitive psychology has to in some sense take account all of these multitude of emotions that somebody goes through before they are engaging in these things. Say, for example, whether it is attention, or whether you are talking about recall of material under memory experiments, or whether you are talking about thinking and decision making and problem solving. This is basically one of the things that cognitive psychologists are really looking at. In real life settings, say for example, it is a known fact, it is an accepted fact that most people perform various cognitive functions under the influence of different kinds of emotions. So, if you are coming out with a study which is largely based on people who have performed it in a very neutral state of mind, you will wonder, and the question also comes that whether these conditions wherein you have done your experiment will actually extrapolate to people actually making those decisions out in the field. So, this is where the cognition and emotion interaction comes in, and what has happened is that psychologists are trying to really even mimic those situations in their labs. So, obviously, there are there are methodological considerations that you cannot take a lot of your experiments out of the lab directly, and obviously there are efforts at designing experiments which can be. But for the time being, what psychologists have been trying to do is they have been trying to mimic such kind of emotional situations, positive moods, negative moods, excited moods, surprised moods in their labs, and maintaining those moods, manipulating those moods of the participant, and then asking them to engage with our experimental task. So, the idea is that if you want to really check the effects of mood, effects of emotional states on memory, one of the things you might do is you might manipulate the mood of the participants when they come to you. You might expose them to positive stimuli, you might expose them to negative gruesome stimuli, you might irritate them by using particular kinds of ways, and you get them in that state of mind before they are actually doing your task. And those things have been for a long time, and people have been trying to study these things. An example is Pecker and colleagues, they did this study in 2009, and they were actually trying to investigate how drivers' mental states are. So what they did was, they basically found that when drivers are listening to sad music or neutral kind of music, something that is low in arousal or something, what they are doing is they report that it is easier to follow lanes. It's easier to stay in the lane, easier to drive at a constant speed when drivers are listening to either sad music or neutral music. On the other hand, if these drivers were listening to positive, happy music, chirpy music, they actually found it a little bit distracting to follow their lanes, to stick to their task, because apparently that emotional nature of the song is doing something to them. It's probably interacting with their concentration, it's interacting with their executive processes, and so on and so forth. So this is one of the things that people have, these kind of experiments people have been doing, and trying to find out what happens with when you induce such kind of mood states. So let us talk a little bit about how what are the techniques, what are the methods using which people are manipulating mood states. So researchers have constantly tried to manipulate participants' mood states to affect the to measure their effect on cognition. So one of the useful methods includes basically asking people to write about or describe personal events that had created intense emotions at some point in time. So Young and colleagues in 2011, rather recently, they used this technique to create angry or sad mood states. They asked participants to write about things that have made them angry in the past, or write about things that have made them sad in the past. And the idea is, when a participant is actually writing a description of such kind of events, the participant is actually going through those kind of situations again, and such a mood is already induced. And then you can actually make them do particular kinds of tasks, and that the effects of these tasks are very closely related to the mood state that you have induced. Slightly differently, Griskevicius basically in 2009, he told participants to write about a situation when another person had really taken care of you and have made you feel better, and so on and so on. So this is basically, this kind of descriptions basically served to induce the feelings of attachment, induce the feeling of love among the participants. They are a positive, giving kind of a state. Another method that could be used is to, for example, use music to manipulate states. I mean, I talked about Pecker and colleagues study of 2009, where they were actually exposing truck drivers to different kinds of musics. And that is also has been found to be a reliable way of manipulating a participant's mood. So a participant comes to a lab, you ask them to kind of wear headphones, and then you kind of play a music, whatever your choice be, and whatever their theory says that this kind of music induces this kind of mood, this kind of music induces this kind of mood, and according to whatever your theoretical considerations might be, you expose the participant to that kind of music for a given duration. And then after that, you kind of ask them to perform your task, and your assumption is that whatever results you are going to get are basically very closely linked to the mood state that you have induced. This is one of the methods, very well known or say, for example, well used method. Another method we can talk about is Welton's method. Welton in 1968, he basically asked participants to read emotional sentences that are intended to produce progressively more intense positive or negative feelings. So other than the production part, which I talked recently, Young and colleagues method, Welton's method basically involves participants actually reading passages and reading sentences that are highly emotional, and that reading them will basically use that kind of emotion. So this is also one of the methods. You can write small passages, and those passages could contain, you kind of get people to agree on that. Okay, 6 people, 10 people agree that this particular sentence here, or this 2, 3, 4 lines here induce a positive state. So that is done for positive state. These 4, 5 lines induce a negative state. And then when the participant comes, you ask them to read depending on whatever condition of experiments you want to induce. ask them to read these sentences and then go to your task, and your task could be completely unrelated. It could be basically a visual search task in perception, or a memory recall task, or say for example decision making or a problem solving task. And because you've induced a negative or a positive or a sad or an irritated mood, the kind of decisions they are going to make, or the kind of search performance or memory performance that they are going to give, will be closely related to the mood state that you've induced. Now, I have talked about these methods. Let me kind of shift to one of the very important aspect, a basic aspect in mood studies. So, there is a lot of effect, there is a lot of crosstalk between how different kinds of emotional states, and I am talking about moods more important, more precisely. I think the entire week I will probably be talking about moods more, because moods are, let me just define them for you. Moods are transient emotional states that participants or people in general keep going through. During a course of a day, there will be time that you will feel very happy, chirpy, and motivated. Say for example, early in the morning, and you plan so many things. I am going to do this, that, and this is my plan of the day. And there are other scenarios. Say for example, you could feel very sad about in the same day, so evening something happened and you kind of are sad. So, these are transient emotional states that people go through throughout the cycle of the day, and they do not really last long, but the point is that by the for the duration they are there, they can actually influence the way you are behaving. Say for example, if you are in such a bad mood, something as bad has happened, you just come out of home or come out of school, and then you meet somebody, a friend, or a person that you might know of, and this person waves and says hello, and you are in such a bad mood, you do not even reply and you go ahead, and this person is going to think, okay, maybe this guy does not like me, but it is just because your mood is not really correct at that point in time. So, moods are these kind of states, and cognitive psychology research, or research looking into emotion, has made use of this transient emotional state to be able to measure how these different emotional states might influence people's cognitive functioning. So, let us try and come back to this. I will talk to you a little bit about the effect or the interaction between mood and attention. So, one of the first systematic accounts, one of the first systematic attempts to understand this interaction between emotion and attention and performance was given by Easterbrook way back in 1959. So, he gave a particular hypothesis which is better known as Easterbrook's hypothesis nowadays. And Easterbrook's hypothesis proposes that the range of environmental cues that get attention, the kind of information that you are picking up from the environment, reduces as the arousal or anxiety keeps on increasing. And this basically leads to what is referred to as, you might have heard this term a lot of times, tunnel vision. If you are very highly aroused, you are very focused, or say for example, if you are very angry, sometimes you might not be able to attend to so many other cues in the environment. You are very happy, in that excitement you miss on so many things. If you are very sad, you are not really interested in. So, these kind of things, when you are generally talking about anxiety, or you are generally talking about high arousal, this is what it takes you to. It takes you to what is referred to as tunnel vision. You are kind of focusing only on things that are relevant to you, that are relevant for your purpose, and kind of try and miss, sometimes decidedly, sometimes unknowingly, miss out on a lot of other things. So, a lot of research has supported this idea. There is a lot of research evidence, and you might look up. I will talk to you about some of the researches today as well, that anxiety, when you are very anxious, when you are kind of say for example waiting for something, and searching for something, and those kind of things, leads to what is referred to as the narrowing of attention. If you are highly anxious, you are going to be able to look at particular details, but you might miss out on a lot of other relevant details. So, according to Gable and Harmon Jones, and they did this study in 2010, anxiety is a negative emotional state high in motivational intensity, because if you are anxious about something, sometimes you are waiting for someone and at a railway platform, and there are so many people, there is a lot of crowd over there, and because you are anxiously just waiting for this one person, there might be 2, 3, 4 other that kind of pass that you might already know, but you just did not pay attention to them. Things like you are so many things that are happening because you are just in that heightened state of arousal, heightened state of motivational intensity, that you kind of leave out all the peripheral information that is not directly relevant to what you are looking for. So, individuals become anxious in different kinds of situations, in threatening situations, and so they are motivated to attend and respond to the source of threat. I am just taking an example from the various other possibilities. So, that is one of the things. If you are highly feeling threatened, then what the idea will be that you are most motivated to respond to the source of threat and nothing else. Let us talk a little bit about how attention might impact your memory performance, or how this interaction between emotion and attention and memory really plays out. So, Levine and Edelstein in 2009, they actually argue for a slightly modified version of Easterbrook's hypothesis, and they say that if you kind of modify this one a little bit, it could account for many of the effects that people report of on anxiety or stress on long term memory. And they basically say that emotion enhances our memory for information central to our goals. If you are happy, or if you are sad, and if there is something like that, this emotional state will enhance your memory for the information that is relevant at that point in time, but it impairs it for peripheral or unimportant information. Suppose you are angry at somebody, suppose you are very angry at somebody, and whatever information about that person is being given, only that is what you are attending. All the other things, only information that kind of is going to reinforce your anger is being attended, everything else is kind of being left out. These are examples that are possible. Cabinet and Nixon in 2006, they tried to study the effects of memory on anxiety by having skydivers. Now, skydiving is an activity that can be potentially very anxiety provoking. So, what they did was they actually wanted to check the effects of anxiety and memory. So, what they did was they asked skydivers to learn a list of words while on the plane just before they were about to dive. So, at a height of 8,000 feet, you are kind of all geared up with your parachute and everything else, and at this point in time these people are asking you to remember a list of words. So, this is one. And the second was the second condition. In the control condition, they asked these skydivers to learn the same list of words or a different comparable list of words on the ground. So, when tested on the ground, the total number of words recalled was rather similar in both the conditions, but the balance of what was recalled actually differed a lot. So, the skydivers who had learned the words under stressful conditions, just before they were about to jump off the plane, and they might have been making so many calculations, they might have been afraid or anxious about the jump, they recognized words mostly relevant to skydiving. The number of words that they recognized, the number of words that they recalled which were irrelevant to skydiving was much few. I mean, it was much very less as compared to when they were learning these words while they were on the ground. So, these findings suggest that anxiety does increase the focus on relevant stimuli at the expense of non-relevant ones. If you are anxious, you will and this can actually be a vicious cycle of sorts, because you are kind of attending to things only that are reinforcing your emotional state in some sense. We can talk about another study by Loftus and colleagues. Another study found that the memory for details was rather poor when eyewitnesses watched a person pointing a gun at a cashier while receiving some money. So, if they are looking at there is the somebody who is trying to loot the bank, and they are pointing a gun at the cashier and receiving some money, a lot of details they would miss. The participants would not remember a lot of details. Memory for the details of the same scene was much better in the unemotional situation when when this person is just giving out a check and waiting patiently for the cashier to count and give the money back. So, Loftus and colleague, they use a very interesting term. They use the term weapons focus to refer to the way in which the weapon attracts the attention, because weapon is seen as a source of threat. So, if you detect a weapon somewhere, I mean, you are kind of inside in yourself primed to keep attending and keep looking at the weapon, because there is this perception of possible threat and stuff like that. So, this is basically what is something that it will kind of ask you to filter out a lot of other peripheral things that you might not really be interested in at that point in time. Now, moving on, Tallarico and colleagues in 2009, they asked participants to recall 8 emotional autobiographical memories. So, 4 events, positive events that have made you feel happy or calm or in love or positively surprised, and for negative emotions, say for example, when you were negatively surprised, or you're angry, or you're sad, or you're afraid of something. So 4 different emotions they were basically asked, and they found was that there was very poor memory for peripheral details with memories for negative emotions as compared to positive emotions. When they were talking about positive memories, they could provide a lot of details as well, but when they were talking about negative memories, they would probably talk only about those negative things that happened, only things that were triggering negative thoughts, but not so many of the other details about these memories. So sad memories, however, were linked with a reasonably good recall of peripheral details, confirming the earlier findings of Gable and Harmon Jones. So it's not, I mean, obviously sadness is also a negative emotion, but compared to some other kinds of negative emotions evoked here, negative surprise, anger, and fear, sadness actually led to better recall of these peripheral details. So that is one difference you can make, that among the negative emotions, this is one that still kind of maintains your recall of negative of peripheral details. Now learning and memory are directly affected by mood as well, and there could be 2 approaches that you can take in trying to understand this interaction. The first is that researchers can manipulate a participant's mood state at the learning time or at the retrieval time, and the second is that researchers can consider the effects on memory of intentionally emotional events that are happened at the in the world at large, or in the individual's personal life. So what kind of highly emotion provoking events have happened and how they have kind of affected your memory, that is one. And the second is, you can obviously take an individual, manipulate the mood state and see how the memory of particular things will be. So we will talk about mood manipulations first. We will talk about the first case first. Now most people will find themselves recalling far more negative or than pleasant memories. If you look back in time and if you see last 10 years what happened, it's highly probable that you will probably remember more vividly the negative details, I mean the negative events that would have happened as compared to the positive event. Now and this is basically something which is like, say for example, if you are in a happy state, you will kind of look back and just think of happy memories. When you are in a negative state, when you are sad or angry, or you've just had a fight with somebody, you would look back and you will actually find those kind of memories coming back. So depending upon whatever emotional state you are, those kind of information is what you will activate. Now this phenomena is referred to as the mood congruent memory. The kind of mood you are in, the kind of memories you will easily activate. I mean, this is basically the the equation. So Miranda and Kuhlstrom in 2005, they asked adult participants to recall autobiographical memories from childhood and adulthood when presented with pleasant, unpleasant, and neutral cues, and they actually found that they try to induce this using happy, sad, or a neutral mood as well, and what they actually found was they did find evidence of mood congruence. They did find evidence of mood congruity. A retrieval of sad memories was facilitated by a sad mood or sad music, and that of happy memories was enhanced by happy mood or happy music. In a different study, Holland and Kensinger, they reviewed the literature about these mood and autobiographical memory interactions, and they basically looked at a lot of studies and they concluded that there is a reliable mood congruent memory effect for positive emotions, while the kind of results, the level of confidence on the results is slightly lesser when you are talking about negative mood and then mood congruent memory with respect to negative states. So why should mood congruent memory be elusive with negative mood? I mean, somebody can ask that, okay, what is happening with the mood congruent memory here? Why are negative states not really producing reliable results? So negative mood states, one of the reasons could be that negative mood states are unpleasant, and so individuals in such a mood state are motivated to change their mood to a more positive one. They are internally motivated to change this, and they are constantly trying to change this mood state. And what is happening is, because of this tussle going on inside the mind of the individual, the mood state is not really, I mean the negative memories don't remain as accessible, and that is one of the reasons why you will see that the relationship between negative mood states and negative memory being activated is not really as strong as compared to positive mood states, because you are trying to maintain the positive mood state while you're trying to kind of come out of the negative mood state is so the correspondence between negative mood and negative memories is not so high as compared to the correspondence between positive mood state and positive memories activation. Rusting and Dehart, in 2000, they conducted a study where participants wrote sentences about negative, positive, and neutral words. So they were given this list of words. Some of them were negative words, some of them were positive words, some of them were neutral words, and they were given these. They were asked to make sentences out of this. And after that, participants were put into a negative mood state by thinking about experiencing distressing events. So the kind of they've been asked to think about whatever bad has happened in your life. Just think about it for a while. Then they assigned the participants to 3 conditions. In one of the conditions, they were told to continue focusing on the negative states. In another condition, they engaged in a positive reappraisal of these distressing events. So this bad event happened, and then the person is asking you to reappraise it. Look at it in a different light. If this thing has happened, it's probably for the good. Something good might have also come out of all the bad things that have happened. So the positive reappraisal is there, and finally they were basically put on unexpected test of free recall. So 3 things are happening, 3 conditions are there, and then what happens is that Rusting and Dehart 2000 in year 2000 find this typical mood congruity effect in the continued focus conditions when they continue to focus on the negative thoughts. In the positive reappraisal condition also the participants showed mood congruity. So they could actually get these effects of mood congruity. Now, these effects were obviously much stronger among participants who had indicated previously that they were generally good at regulating regulating these different mood states. So, these people who can regulate mood states performed better and they give better results. Now, just trying to sum this one up, the reason that mood congruency effects are hard to find with negative mood states could be because people are constantly trying to improve their mood. So, they are not motivationally interested in maintaining that mood so as to access the negative information. Who wants to really remember negative information voluntarily? So, what could be the possible explanations of this mood congruency effect? These may be due to some genuine material advantage for mood congruent material. So, for example, the material is relevant. Also, there might be interestingly a response bias with individuals being more willing to report memories matching with their current mood state and less willing to talk about something that is, say for example, if in a very happy state and somebody starts questioning you about negative things in your life, you are probably less reluctant. You will say, okay, I don't remember. Even in experimental situations, say for example, it could be possible that people are not being able to recall and activate because they are not motivated to access that kind of information. If you are very angry, if you are very sad or depressed, then somebody comes and tries to make you remember the positive things. The general motivation is not there. Fiedler and colleagues in 2001 they tried to work this out, and they could not obtain any evidence for mood congruency effects that these mood congruency effects are due to response bias. So, even though that's a bit of a possibility, but they did this study and they found that no, this was not due to response bias. So, that kind of rules out the response bias based explanation. Now, let me briefly move on to a different kind of a mood effect in memory. This one is referred to as a mood state dependent memory. Now, MSDM, I will refer to this from now onwards. Now, MSDM is basically the fact that if you have learned particular information in a given mood state, if at the retrieval point in time you are in the same mood, you will recall that information better. I mean, I have kind of discussed these things in the previous course when you were discussing memory in detail. But just to give you a clue, is suppose you are very anxious and you kind of are being told some information. Next time you are similarly anxious, you will be able to recall this information easily. Another example I often give is, say for example, you are having a fight with your best friend or a wife or partner or something like that, and it's very interesting that the next time you remember the things that you spoke to each other would probably be in a similar fight that is going on. So, if you are in a similar state when you kind of hear things and you are saying things, the memory for things is better if the retrieval point, your emotional state is rather similar. So, Ukros in 1989 reviewed around 40 studies, and they said that there was a moderate support for the mood state dependent memory. These effects were greater obviously for participants in a positive mood than in a negative one, for reasons we have already talked about. Now, Aish in 1985 argued that MSDM effects on memory can be explained in terms of a do-it-yourself kind of principle. So, the idea is that such effects are more likely to be found when participants generate crucial information for themselves rather than having it explicitly presented. So, if you ask participants to generate such kind of memories that generates their mood of a particular kind, sentence writing or sentence making or describing kind of mood manipulation techniques, then these effects are more reliable. So, that's one of the explanations that people have given. Moving on to some of the other studies. So, Neely did this study in 1997, and therein participants learned instructions concerning a given route in happy or sad conditions, and then they had their memory tested in the following day in happy or sad conditions. Free recall and cued recall was used. Free recall is when you just ask participant to say something, and cued recall is when you give them some cues. The results showed a very strong MSDM effect in free recall. However, when retrieval cues were used, there was no evidence of MSDM. Now, the thing is, MSDM or mood state dependence is probably using mood as a retrieval cue. Now, if you replace that with different retrieval cues, you do not really need to go to moods, and that could be one of the reasons why such kind of effects vanish if you are using retrieval cues. You remember I have talked about this earlier. Tulving gave this encoding specificity principle. If you encode something in a particular manner, if you are going to recall it in the same manner, that kind of helps. That helps your memory. That helps the amount of information you can access. So, I think that is all from me about mood attention and memory interactions. We will continue talking about cognition and emotion in the next lecture of the week.